Yudhishthira's or even surpassed it, then strive for virtuous behavior, for with virtue alone one can conquer the three worlds. I have seen many kings who achieved great victories through their compassion and self-control. Duryodhana was in trade and asked his father to explain how this virtuous behavior could be acquired. Dhritarashtra began to tell an ancient story about the Daitya, King Prahlada, who had once defeated Indra himself with his superior merit. The story unfolded like a mythical epic. Indra, eager to learn from Prahlada's success, assumed the form of a Brahmana and approached him. Prahlada, busy ruling the three worlds, initially declined to teach the Brahmana, but eventually agreed to share his secrets. When he saw the sincerity in the Brahmana's eyes, Prahlada explained that his key to success lay not in pride or malice, but in following the counsel of wise men like Sukra and serving with humility. He listened attentively to their teachings, restrained himself from unrighteous actions, and cultivated a sense of self-control over his senses. This is true virtue, Prahlada said. It is listening to the wisdom of others and acting upon it. The Brahmana was deeply moved by Prahlada's words and asked if he could acquire this behavior for himself. Prahlada, though initially hesitant, eventually granted the boon. The Brahmana, overjoyed, vowed to follow in Prahlada's footsteps. The sun was setting over the kingdom, casting a warm orange glow over the assembly hall where Yudhishthira sat in deep contemplation. He turned to his revered grandsire, Bhishma, and asked, "Grandsire, you have said that behavior is the first of all virtues for a man. But tell me, from where does hope arise? I am consumed by this question, and there is no one else who can answer it." But you, his eyes filled with a mix of longing and despair, searched Bhishma's wise face. Bhishma, sensing the depth of Yudhishthira's emotions, nodded slowly. "Your Highness, I shall tell you a story that will help you understand the nature of hope. It is an ancient tale, one that has been passed down through generations." He paused, collecting his thoughts before beginning. In a distant land there lived a king named Sumitra, who was renowned for his strength and bravery. One day, while out hunting, he spotted a magnificent deer with antlers as tall as trees. Summoning all his skill and speed, Sumitra pierced the deer with an arrow, but to his surprise it did not falter. Instead it ran on, the arrow sticking out of its side. Like a badge of honor, the chase was on, with Sumitra hot on the deer's heels. He pursued it through forests, across rivers and streams, and over vast plains. The deer, seemingly impervious to pain, continued to run, occasionally slowing down to glance back at its pursuer, as if to say, "You may have speed, but I have endurance." Sumitra was amazed by the deer's agility and strength, and his admiration for it grew with each passing moment. As they ran, the landscape unfolded before them like a canvas of endless possibility. The sun beat down upon their heads, casting long shadows behind them. The air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming flowers and the earthy smell of damp soil. Sumitra's bow sang its song as he fired arrow after arrow at his elusive prey, but to no avail. The deer seemed to revel in the chase, darting and weaving through the trees like a ghostly apparition. It was as if it had a secret knowledge that only it possessed, a deep understanding of the natural world and its rhythms. Sumitra, on the other hand, was driven by his passion for the hunt, his desire to prove himself against this wild creature. As the chase continued, the landscape shifted and changed around them. They traversed dense forests, crossed sparkling streams, and climbed over rocky outcroppings. The sun beat down upon their heads, casting a golden glow over everything, and yet, despite the weariness that began to creep into Sumitra's limbs, he refused to give up. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the deer led Sumitra to in the heart of a vast and dense forest. King Sumitra, weary from his hunting expedition, stumbled upon an asylum of ascetics. His armor worn, his bow slung over his shoulder, and his hunger pangs gnawing at his stomach, he sat down to rest beneath the shade of a towering tree. The ascetics, noticing the king's fatigue and the grandeur that still clung to him, approached with reverence. They honored him with their presence. King Sumitra accepted their hospitality and inquired about their penances. The ascetics, wise and learned in the ways of spiritual growth, shared with him their progress and answered his questions with humility. But as they conversed, their curiosity got the better of them, and they asked the king to reveal the reason behind his unexpected visit. "Why have you, almighty ruler, come to this sacred place, armed with bow and sword?" inquired one of the ascetics, his eyes sparkling with interest. "Tell us what brings you to our humble abode. Are you seeking solace from the burdens of your kingdom, or perhaps fleeing from some great calamity?" King Sumitra taken aback by their directness, took a deep breath and began to recount his tale. "I am born into the illustrious lineage of the Hahayas," he said, "and my name is Sumitra, son of Mitra. I was on a hunting expedition accompanied by my ministers and ladies of my household, when I chased a deer with an arrow lodged in its side. The animal fled with great speed, leading me to this forest where I find myself now." Fat-headed, hungry, and disappointed, the ascetics listened intently as the king shared his story, their faces filled with compassion and understanding. "We are but mere mortals," one of them said, "and our knowledge is limited. But we can see that you have come to us, seeking guidance, perhaps even solace from your own doubts and fears." King Sumitra's eyes locked onto the ascetic's wise gaze. "I confess, I am torn between my royal duties and my own desires," he said, his voice barely above a whisper as a cane. "I am bound by duty to my people and my kingdom, but as an individual I yearn for something more, something that transcends the boundaries of hope and despair." The ascetics nodded in unison, their faces aglow with understanding. "Hope, O mighty rulers," said one of them, "is a double-edged sword. It can inspire greatness, but it can also lead to disappointment and heartache. We have pondered this mystery for many years, and we can see that you are struggling to reconcile your own desires with the demands of your royal station." The king's eyes widened as he listened to their words, a sense of wonder creeping over him. "Tell me more," he implored. In a tranquil forest, Bhishma sat amidst a gathering of sages, listening intently to the tale of Rishabha, one of the most revered seers of their time. With a hint of a smile on his face, Rishabha began to recount an extraordinary encounter that had left him in a ways. He spoke the sane, shifted to a sacred asylum, nestled deep within the forest, where the revered sages Nara and Narayana dwelled in perfect harmony with nature. It was here that Rishabha had once arrived, seeking solace and spiritual guidance. He described how he had performed his ablutions in a celestial lake, offering prayers to the ancestors and the sacred Ganga, which rose from its waters within the asylum's tranquil surroundings. Rishabha chanced upon an extraordinary sight. A tall and emaciated sage named Tanu, whose very presence seemed to radiate an era of asceticism. Tanu's body was gaunt, his neck and limbs like withered twigs, yet his eyes shone with a deep wisdom that captivated Rishabha. As he beheld Tanu, Rishabha felt a sense of trepidation wash over him. But he stood before the sage, saluting his feet in respect. As they sat together, Rishabha shared his name and lineage with Tanu, who began to discourse on the timeless principles of Dharma and Artha. The air was filled with the sweet scent of spiritual discussion as the sages surrounding them listened intently. It was then that a majestic King Vairadhyama arrived at the asylum, accompanied by his entourage and ladies in waiting. Vairadhyama's eyes, like lotus petals, shone with a deep sorrow, for he had lost his young son in these very woods. His only child, Vairadhyama, was nowhere to be found, and the king's heart was heavy with grief. Addressing Tanu, Vairadhyama poured out his anguish, confessing that his hope of finding his son seemed to be dwindling. As he listened to the king's words, Tanu fell silent, lost in contemplation. The sight of him buried in thought only deepened Vairadhyama's despair. In a voice barely above a whisper, the king asked, "What is it that surpasses hope? What is greater than this unquenchable longing?" Tanu slowly raised his head, and with eyes shining like stars, he revealed to Vairadhyama the truth behind his son's disappearance. The young prince had inadvertently insulted the great sage, who had been forced to bear the humiliation in silence. Moved by compassion, Tanu shared this tale with Vairadhyama, and as he spoke, the king's eyes filled with tears as the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the forest. Thus, in the heart of a dense forest, King Vairadhyama sat in contemplation, his eyes filled with a deep sense of longing. His only son, Vairadhyama, had gone missing, and the king's every waking moment was consumed by the thought of finding him. He had come to this sacred place, seeking guidance from the wise Rishabha, a revered Brahmana known for his unwavering dedication to his dharma. King Vairadhyama approached Rishabha. He noticed that the sage hung his head in shame, his eyes cast downward. The king's words of introduction were met with silence, and Rishabha remained still, his body language a testament to the bitter memories they shared in days gone by. Rishabha had been grossly disrespected by King Vairadhyama, and the Brahmana's heart had been heavy with resentment. The king, unaware of the underlying emotions that lay between them, asked Rishabha about the nature of hope. He inquired, what was more difficult to attain than an image created by hope within one's mind? Rishabha, recalling the past affronts he had suffered at the hands of the king chose his words carefully before responding. "There is nothing, O King," Rishabha said, his voice laced with a subtle hint of sorrow that equals hope in slenderness. "I have sought many kings, and found that nothing is so difficult to acquire as an image set by hope before the mind." The king's eyes widened as he grasped the depth of Rishabha's words. Acknowledging their profound truth undeterred by his own past transgressions, King Vairadhyana pressed on seeking further clarification. He asked, "What was more slender than Rishabha's emaciated body?" The sage smiled wistfully and began to enumerate the varieties of hope that existed in the world: the hope of a contented applicant, the hope of one who never disregards an applicant, the hope placed upon ungrateful or cruel individuals, and even the hope cherished by parents for their lost children. As Rishabha spoke, his words painted vivid pictures in the king's mind. The monarch realized that his own hope was indeed slenderer than any of these varieties, a realization that filled him with humility. He and his household prostrated themselves before Rishabha, their heads bent in reverence. As they touched the sage's feet, moved by the king's contrition, Rishabha smiled once more and revealed his true nature to King Vairadhyana. With a mere thought, he caused Vairadhyana to be brought to that spot, demonstrating the power of his penances and learning the sage, then rebuked the king gently, but firmly, reminding him of the transience of human attachments. As Rishabha departed into an adjacent forest.
In the midst of a tranquil forest, Yudhishthira sat at the feet of his venerable grandfather Bhishma, drinking in every word as if it were nectar itself. His eyes shone with an insatiable hunger for knowledge, and he begged Bhishma to discourse once more on the timeless subject of morality. Bhishma's eyes twinkled with pleasure as he began to tell from the ancient past one that would reveal the secrets of self-liberation. "Listen well," he said, "to the story of Gautama, the wise sage who dwelled in solitude on the Parapatra hills for 60,000 years. The wind rustled through the leaves as Bhishma's words conjured up a picture of Gautama's hermitage. The sage had retreated to this sacred place seeking enlightenment, and for decades he practiced the most severe ascetic austerities. His body was transformed by his devotion, but his soul remained untouched by the world. As Gautama sat in stillness, lost in contemplation, a figure emerged from the trees. Dima, the regent of the world, had come to pay his respects to this great sage. The two men locked eyes, and Gautama's heart was filled with reverence for the embodiment of Dharma. He rose to greet Dima, joining his hands in a gesture of devotion. Dima, too, felt a deep sense of respect for the ascetic Gautama. He approached the sage with dignity, his presence radiating an air of authority and wisdom. "I have come to seek your counsel," he said, his voice like thunder on a summer day. "Tell me, O wise one, how can I assist you?" Gautama's eyes sparkled as he posed two questions that had haunted him for years. "How may one repay the debt owed to one's mother and father?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "And what acts must be performed to attain the regions of pure bliss that lie beyond the reach of mortal?" Sima's expression turned grave as he pondered the questions. He knew the weight of these debts, for they were inscribed on every soul like a sacred mantra. After a moment of contemplation, he spoke in a voice that was both gentle and commanding. "Imsa, the practice of truth and purity," he began, "is the key to repaying one's debt to those who have given life. One must ceaselessly worship one's mother and father with offerings of devotion and service, and when the time comes for sacrifice, one should perform the sacred rituals of the horse sacrifice, showering gifts upon the Brahmanas in profusions." Yama finished speaking. A sense of clarity descended upon Gautama like a benediction. He knew that he had been given a gift beyond measure, the secrets of self-liberation and the path to regions of pure bliss.
In the midst of a great war, King Yudhishthira sat amidst his advisors, pondering the weighty matters that beset him. His treasury was depleted, his troops were dwindling, and his enemies were closing in on all sides. As he sought guidance from the venerable Bhishma, he asked, what course of conduct should a king adopt? When he is shorn of friends, surrounded by wicked ministers, and unable to see his way, clearly should he seek wealth through evil means or lay down his life without seeking it. Bhishma, wise and knowing, gazed upon the young king with compassion. He began to speak in measured tones, conversant as you are with duties. Yudhishthira, I shall offer my counsel on this matter. Morality is a subtle thing, best understood through the scriptures. But even they provide no clear answer to your question. He paused, collecting his thoughts before continuing. A king's primary duty is to protect his people and ensure their prosperity. When faced with adversity, he must act with intelligence and cunning. He may employ means that are not strictly righteous, but which ultimately lead to the well-being of his kingdom. However, such actions should be taken only as a last resort, for they can also lead to destruction. Bhishma's words hung in the air like a promise, yet also a warning. A king who relies solely on his own righteousness will not survive long in these treacherous times. He said he must adapt and change with the circumstances, even if it means resorting to actions that are normally considered wrong. The old sage's eyes seemed to bore into Yudhishthira's very soul as he continued. A Kshatriya by his very nature is a warrior and a protector in times of distress. He must not hesitate to take what he needs from those who have it, even if it means using force, or in doing so he ensures the survival of his people and ultimately protects the kingdom itself. As Bhishma finished speaking, the weight of his words settled upon Yudhishthira like a mantle. He knew that the path ahead would be fraught with peril, but also that he had been given a crucial lesson that in times of adversity a king must not only act wisely, but also ruthlessly. The young king rose from his seat, his heart heavy with the knowledge that he would have to make difficult choices. He knew that he could no longer rely solely on his own righteousness. Instead, he would have to navigate the complex web of morality and expediency that lay before him. The fate of his kingdom hung in the balance, and Yudhishthira was determined to do whatever it took to ensure its survival. As he departed, Bhishma's words echoed within him. A king who relies solely on his own righteousness. In a somber tone, Yudhishthira, the eldest Pandava prince, posed a question to the venerable Bhishma, his esteemed grandfather and mentor. What should a king do, he asked, when faced with weakness, procrastination, and fear, when cities are lost, wealth is depleted, and friends are disloyal? The weight of these words hung in the air like a dark cloud, as if the very fate of the kingdom itself depended on finding an answer. Bhishma, wise and experienced, gazed at Yudhishthira with understanding eyes. If the invading enemy is just and fair, he began, then the king should make peace with him, restoring what has been taken without delay. His words were laced with a hint of pragmatism, as if to say that sometimes it's better to yield than to risk all in battle. But Bhishma continued, his voice taking on a more somber tone. If the enemy is strong and wicked, seeking victory through deceit, then the king should make peace with him too, surrendering some of his territories. The air seemed to grow heavier as Yudhishthira listened intently. This was not a message of defeatism, but rather a call to prioritize survival above all else. If, however, Bhishma said, his voice rising in urgency, the enemy refuses to make peace, then the king must abandon his capital and all his possessions, sacrificing everything for the sake of escaping danger. His words hung like a challenge, daring Yudhishthira to consider the ultimate sacrifice. What man of honor would risk his own life when escape is possible? Bhishma asked. Yudhishthira's next question weighed heavily on Bhishma's heart. When his people turn against him, when invaders oppress him, and his treasury lies empty, what should the king do then? The weight of these words was crushing, as if the very foundations of the kingdom were crumbling beneath their feet. Bhishma's response came like a gentle breeze on a summer day. In such times, he said, the king should seek to make peace with his enemy, if that enemy is just. But if the enemy is unrighteous, then the king must summon all his strength and courage. His words were laced with a sense of hope, as if even in the darkest hour there was still a way forward. A king, Bhishma declared, can conquer the entire earth with the help of a small but loyal force. If he falls in battle, he will ascend to heaven, where Indra himself awaits him. The air seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy as Yudhishthira listened intently. This was no mere strategy for survival. It was a call to greatness, and so Bhishma concluded. The sun had set over the kingdom, casting a warm orange glow over the bustling streets. King Yudhishthira sat on his throne, his brow furrowed in concern as he addressed his grandfather. Bhishma, grandfather, Yudhishthira said, when morality and righteousness are lost and robbers hold sway over the land, how is a Brahmana to survive? His sons and grandsons depend on him for support. But what can he do in such a time of calamity? Bhishma's eyes clouded with thought as he replied, when the world has descended into chaos, a Brahmana must rely on his knowledge. Everything in this world belongs to those who are good, not to those who are wicked. He who seizes wealth from the wicked and gives it to the good is said to be conversant with the morality of adversity. Yudhishthira's eyes widened as he listened intently. But what about a king grandfather? How should he behave in such times? Bhishma nodded gravely. A wise king must live by his wits and knowledge. He may take what is not freely given, but only if it serves the greater good. It is not courtly to act with prudence in times of distress. They spoke. A young servant boy entered the room bearing a tray of steaming tea and sweet pastries. Bhishma's eyes twinkled as he took a cup from the tray. A king must also be mindful of his relationships. He continued, he should not oppress the wise men and Brahmanas who serve him, for they are the pillars of society. By oppressing them even in times of hardship, he incurs reproach and sin. Yudhishthira leaned forward, his interest piqued. What about slander? Grandfather, how can a king deal with false accusations and malicious whispers? Bhishma's expression turned stern. Slander is the hallmark of wicked men. A king should never listen to such talk or act on its basis. If he does, he risks bringing shame upon himself and his kingdom. As the evening wore on, Bhishma spoke of ancient wisdom and the conduct of great kings who had come before them. He told Yudhishthira that a true ruler must be guided by principles, not by personal gain or malice. Those who speak well of others in public assemblies are good men. He said, a king should strive to emulate their example, putting the needs of his people above all else. The stars began to twinkle in the night sky. Yudhishthira rose from his throne, a look of determination on his face. "You will remember your words, grandfather," he said. "I will strive to be a just and compassionate ruler, guided by the principles of righteousness and morality." The sun was setting over the kingdom, casting a warm orange glow over the bustling streets. Bhishma, the wise and venerable warrior, stood before King Yudhishthira, his eyes shining with a deep understanding of the ways of kingship. Prince Bhishma began, "A king's wealth is not just gold and jewels, but also the strength and loyalty of his people. To build a strong kingdom, one must first fill the treasury, drawing from both their own lands and those of their enemies. This is the source of their power, and it is what allows them to grow and prosper." King Yudhishthira listened intently, his brow furrowed in thought. He knew that Bhishma spoke the truth, for he had seen firsthand the devastating effects of a weak treasury on a kingdom. But how can one fill the treasury? The king asked, his voice filled with concern. "Is it through purity and righteousness, or by being cruel and heartless?" Bhishma smiled, his eyes twinkling with wisdom. "A king must walk a middle path," he said, "one that balances compassion and strength, mercy and justice. A weak king cannot have a treasury, nor can one without a kingdom ever hope to prosper." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Bhishma continued his lesson. A king's power is not just in their wealth, but also in their army, all these and friends. Without these, they are nothing more than a figurehead, and it is not just about having them, but also about maintaining them, protecting them from waste and excess. King Yudhishthira nodded, his mind racing with the implications of Bhishma's words. He knew that he had much to learn, and that the path to greatness was fraught with challenges and pitfalls. "But what of those who have been defeated by us?" the king asked, his voice filled with a sense of unease. "Should we not punish them for their transgressions?" Bhishma's expression turned grave. "A king must always be mindful of their actions," he said, "for if they are cruel and heartless, they will only sow discord and fear among their people. Instead, they should strive to bring their enemies under their way, to make them allies rather than foes." As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Bhishma finished his lesson. "A king must always walk a fine line," he said, "between compassion and strength, mercy and justice, for it is only through balance and moderation that they can truly achieve greatness." In the midst of a grand assembly, Bhishma stood tall, his words dripping with wisdom. He began to speak of the duties that lay before a Kshatriya, a warrior of great renown, for one who possesses intelligence and knowledge. He said, "The earning of religious merit and the acquisition of wealth are the obvious paths to follow." As Bhishma spoke, his eyes seemed to gaze into the very soul of his audience. He cautioned against the pitfalls of philosophical debates that led nowhere. "It is like trying to discern
whether footprints on the ground belonged to a wolf or not, he said with a gentle smile, in the end it matters little, for we cannot see the fruits of our actions in this world. Bhishma's words were laced with a deep understanding of human nature. He knew that power was the key to true mastery over one's circumstances. A Kshatriya should seek the acquisition of power, he declared, for he who is powerful is master of everything. Wealth leads to the possession of an army, and with a strong force by his side, he can obtain wise counsel from those who are intelligent. As Bhishma spoke, his voice took on a subtle note of reverence for the mighty. He acknowledged that even the most powerful among them could commit mistakes, but it was how they responded to their errors that truly mattered. Righteousness and power, he said, are like two great rivers that flow together. If they are joined in harmony, they can rescue men from the greatest perils. But Bhishma's words also held a note of caution. He knew that power could be a double-edged sword, capable of bringing about both great good and great evil. Righteousness, he said, is like smoke that depends on the wind for its motion. It is powerless without the support of those who wield true authority. As Bhishma's discourse came to an end, his audience was left in contemplative silence. They knew that they had been given a rare gift, the wisdom of one who had lived a life of great purpose and power, and so they listened intently as he offered them guidance on how to live their own lives. For those who have fallen from a state of affluence, Bhishma said gently, there is hope for redemption. By studying the scriptures, worshipping the Brahmanas, and living a life of humility and compassion, one can cleanse oneself of sin and regain the respect of the world. As his words faded away, Vishwa's audience felt the sense of peace settle over them. They knew that they had been given a precious gift, the wisdom to live their lives with purpose and integrity, and so they went forth into the world armed with the knowledge that true power comes not from wealth or position, but from living a life of righteousness and compassion.
In the rolling hills and dense forests of ancient India, there lived a robber named Kavya, born to a Kshatriya father and a Nishita mother. Despite his profession, Kavya was a man of great character, devoted to upholding the duties of a Kshatriya warrior. He was intelligent, courageous, and well versed in the scriptures, which he revered with utmost respect. Kavya's days were filled with a unique blend of thievery and kindness. Every morning and evening he would chase deer through the forest, not to hunt them for sport, but to provide sustenance for the ascetics who resided there. With his unparalleled knowledge of animal behavior and the forest secrets, Kavya was an unparalleled hunter. Yet his arrows never missed their mark. His strength and prowess were legendary, and he could vanquish hundreds of troops alone. But Kavya's heart remained humble and kind. He would often visit his elderly parents, who lived in the forest, bringing them honey, meat, fruits, and roots to sustain them. He entertained all those who deserved honor with lavish feasts, providing for their every need. His respect for Brahmanas was unwavering. He would often gift them dear flesh, knowing that even the most reluctant recipients would appreciate his generosity. One day thousands of robbers, notorious for their cruelty and disregard for restraints, approached Kavya to elect him as their leader. They were drawn to his wisdom, courage, and firm resolve, which they believed would protect them from harm. Kavya accepted their request, but with a condition. He would lead them only if they agreed to follow certain rules. Never kill a woman, he declared, or one who is afraid, or a child, or an ascetic. Do not slay those who abstain from battle, nor seize women by force. Protect Brahmanas at all costs. They are the guardians of truth and virtue. Obey their commands, and you shall find prosperity on this earth and salvation in the next. The robbers, moved by Kavya's words, vowed to follow his teachings, and so under his guidance they transformed from ruthless plunderers into noble warriors, protecting the innocent and upholding justice. As a result of their newfound morality, they achieved great success in this world, while Kavya himself earned immense merit for his good deeds. Bhishma, the revered elder statesman, continued to narrate Kavya's story, saying that anyone who remembered this tale would never fear the denizens of the forest or any earthly creature. They would be as secure as a king in the midst of danger, their hearts filled with courage and compassion for such a person. No wicked man could pose a threat, and they would live in harmony with all creatures, just like Kavya, the robber who became a hero. The sun was setting over the kingdom of Hastinapura, casting a warm orange glow over the bustling streets. Ishma, the revered patriarch and advisor to King Dhritarashtra, sat in contemplative silence, his eyes lost in thought. He began to speak, his voice low and measured, as he launched into a tale of ancient wisdom in this matter of governance. Bhishma said, "Our scriptures reveal the timeless truth that has guided kings for centuries. It is a teaching imparted by Brahman himself, the creator of all things. The wealth of those who dedicate themselves to sacred rituals and sacrifices should never be touched, for it is as if one were to steal from the gods themselves." Bhishma's words carried weight, for he was a man of great wisdom and experience. He had seen many kings come and go, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. A Kshatriya, he continued, should only take wealth from those who do not perform these sacred duties, for it is the duty of the warrior class to protect and provide for the people, not to plunder the innocent. As Bhishma spoke, his eyes seemed to gaze into a distant past, as if he were reliving memories of long-forgotten battles and triumphs. "All creatures on this earth," he said, "and all the joys of sovereignty belong to the Kshatriyas. Their wealth is not for personal gain, but for the well-being of their people and the performance of sacred rites." The air was filled with the scent of incense as Bhishma's words wove a spell of reverence around him. He spoke of the duty of kings to feed the gods, the ancestors, and the people with offerings of clarified. But a virtuous ruler, he said, should take away wealth from those who do not honor these duties. By doing so, he can bring joy to many good people and create a kingdom of prosperity. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Bhishma's words turned to the importance of conquests that last beyond this life. A king should extend his conquests in the next world, he said, according to the measure of his power. Just as vegetable products grow gradually, sacrifices like these very plants spring from no adequate cause, but bring forth fruit in due season. The night air grew quiet, as if the very trees and animals were listening intently to Bhishma's words. He spoke of driving away those who refused to perform sacrifices, just as one would shoo away flies and gnats from a milking cow. This is consistent with morality, he said, his voice steady and unwavering. As the last rays of sunlight faded, Bhishma's tale came full circle. Questions of morality, he said, become finer and finer, like dust pounded between two stones, as they are. In a serene lake, three Sakila fishes lived together as close friends. Among them was Bhishma's friend, a wise fish named Kritavarma, who always thought ahead and prepared for the future. His companion, another wise fish named Ashvata, possessed great presence of mind and could think on his feet. The third fish, however, was named Vritra, and he was notorious for being procrastinating. One day a group of fishermen arrived at the lake armed with baskets to scoop out its waters into a lower ground through various outlets. As the water level began to decrease, Kritavarma grew concerned about their safety. He addressed his companions, "Friends, we are in grave danger. The lake's waters are being drained, and soon our path will be obstructed. We must flee immediately." Vritra, however, dismissed Kritavarma's warning, saying, "There is no need to rush. Let us stay put." Ashvata, the wise fish with great presence of mind, intervened. "When the time comes, I always prepare for it according to policy." But Vritra refused to listen and instead chose to delay his departure. Kritavarma, realizing that his companions were not taking him seriously, decided to act quickly on his own. He swam against the current and reached a nearby deep lake. The fishermen, having drained most of the water from their original lake, shut in the remaining fish using various means. As they began to agitate the little water left, Ashvata cleverly hid among the caught fish by biting onto a string tied around him. He pretended to be trapped, making the fishermen believe that all the fish attached to the string had been caught. Meanwhile, Vritra was caught with many other fish and met his demise as the fishermen removed them to a deep pool for washing. Ashvata, however, saw an opportunity to escape. When the fishermen least expected it, he broke free from the string and swam away to safety. Vishwa's words echoed through the air, just like the procrastinating fish who failed to divine the hour of danger due to his lack of intelligence. So too does a man who thinks himself clever, but fails to act in time, meet with great danger. He continued, "On the other hand, those who possess much foresight and presence of mind succeed in achieving happiness, and those who think ahead and prepare for their goals using proper means achieve even greater success." Vishwa's words were not just mere advice, but a reflection of his own understanding of the world. He knew that time is fleeting and cannot be seen, yet it shapes our lives and determines our fate. the divisions of time, from Kashfa to Kalpa, and the various seasons, all play their part in shaping human destiny, and in the end Bhishma concluded that those who think ahead using their foresight in presence of. In the midst of a dense forest a majestic banyan tree stood tall, its trunk strong and sturdy with numerous branches stretching out in all directions. The tree was a haven for diverse creatures, including birds, that sang sweet melodies from its boughs. At the foot of this grand tree lived Palata, a wise mouse who had dug a complex network of tunnels and outlets to ensure his safety. Meanwhile, on one of the tree's branches, Lomasa, a sleek and cunning cat, resided in comfort, feeding on a steady supply of birds that strayed too close. However, fate had other plans. For this feeling predator, Chandala, a woolly hunter, had set up his traps nearby, and one day the cat found itself caught in one of them. As the cat struggled to free itself from the snare, Palata emerged from his underground lair, sensing an opportunity. He cautiously approached the trap, where he discovered the cat's predicament. Without hesitation, the mouse began to eat the flesh that had been left as bait, lying to himself at the irony of the situation. However, Palata's merriment was short-lived, for he soon realized that his presence had attracted two new predators, a coppery-eyed mongoose named Harita and an owl named Chandrika. The mouse found itself surrounded by danger on all sides, with no clear escape route. In this desperate moment, Palata made a crucial decision. He chose to seek the protection of the cat, his sworn enemy, who was now trapped in the snare. Recognizing that the cat's distress could be turned into an opportunity for both their survival, Palata decided to consult the feline on its own interests. He approached the cat and began to reason with it. "Why should you struggle against fate?" Palata asked. "You are caught in this trap, and if you continue to fight, you will only invite more danger. Instead, consider making peace with me. Together we can find a way out of this predicament." The mouse's words struck a chord within the cat's mind. It realized that its situation was indeed precarious, and that seeking an alliance with Palata might be its best chance for survival. The two former enemies began to discuss their options, and as they talked, an unlikely friendship blossomed. In this tale of the banyan tree, we find a timeless lesson on how to navigate adversity. Even in the face of multiple dangers, one must think critically and seek opportunities that may arise from unexpected places. By doing so, we can often turn our enemies into allies and find a way out of even the most daunting challenges. This parable was shared by Bhishma, the great-grandfather of Yudhishthira, who sought to impart wisdom on how a king should conduct himself in times of distress. Bhishma's words were laced with compassion and understanding as he explained that making peace with in the palace of King Brahmadatta at Campania, a remarkable bird named Puyanai lived with the royal family. Puyanai was no ordinary bird. She possessed great knowledge and could mimic the cries of all animals. She had been living in the palace for a long time, and the king's queen had given birth to a son around the same time as Puyanai's own offspring. Every day, Puyanai would venture out to the shores of the Aegean and bring back two fruits, one for her young one and the other for the infant prince. These fruits were said to be sweet as nectar, capable of increasing strength and energy. The infant prince would eat the fruit that Puyanai gave him, and his strength grew with each passing day. One fateful day, while being carried by his nurse, the infant prince spotted Puyanai's young one playing near them. With a child's impulsiveness, he ran towards the bird, picked it up in his hands, and pressed out its life. The nurse was shocked to see the dead bird as she returned from her daily errand. Puyanai, upon seeing her son lying lifeless on the ground, wept bitterly. She had always been grateful for the shelter provided by King Brahmadatta's family. However, this incident changed everything. Puyanai realized that Kshatriyas like the king and his prince were untrustworthy. They would only behave with courtesy when they needed something from you, but once their objective was achieved, they would discard you without a second thought. Puyanai vowed to take vengeance on the cruel prince who had taken her child's life. She pierced his eyes with her talons, saying that a sinful act committed deliberately would bring consequences sooner or later. The king, seeing his son blinded by Puyanai, initially felt that she was avenging an injury done to her. However, Puyanai continued to express her grievances and explained the dangers of misplaced trust and conciliation. She believed that once someone had injured another, it was impossible for them to become friends again. The animosity between them would never truly die. Puyanai decided that she could no longer live in a place Where such an injury had been committed, Brahmadatta tried to persuade Puyani to stay, assuring her that the prince's actions were not a reflection of his own character, and that they should continue to coexist peacefully. But Puyani was resolute, knowing that as long as she stayed in the palace, the memory of her child's death would haunt her. In the end, Puyani chose to leave the palace, citing the dangers of misplaced trust and the inevitability of destruction when enemies lived together. She believed that even if a union between an injurer and the avenger seemed to bring peace, animosity would never truly dissipate. With this conviction, Puyani departed from the palace, leaving behind, in a world where righteousness and humanity were slowly fading away, King Yudhishthira sought guidance from his grandfather Bhishma on how to behave as a ruler in such tumultuous times. Bhishma, with the wisdom of ages, shared an ancient tale about King Satyajaya of the Savira kingdom. King Satyajaya was a mighty warrior who had traveled far and wide to seek the counsel of the revered sage Bharadwaja. The king's questions were straightforward. How could he acquire what he didn't have? How could he increase his wealth once acquired? And how could he protect it from being stolen or wasted? Bharadwaja, with a twinkle in his eye, replied, "A wise king should always hold the rod of chastisement in hand, ever ready to strike fear into the hearts of his subjects. He must display his prowess and vigilance at all times, for this is what inspires loyalty and respect." The sage continued, "A king's eyes are the windows to his soul. They should be ever watchful for signs of weakness or deceit among his enemies. His people will tremble with fear when they see their ruler holding the rod of justice aloft. Chastisement, my dear king, is the most essential tool in a ruler's arsenal." Bhishma then elaborated on this philosophy, explaining that a wise king should be like a tortoise, slow and deliberate in his actions, but always prepared to strike when the time is right. He must carefully balance the four pillars of governance: conciliation, gift-giving, disunion, and chastisement. A true leader, Bhishma caution, must know how to conciliate an enemy with sweet words, but also be ever vigilant for signs of weakness or treachery. One should bear one's foe on their shoulders as long as the wind is in their favor, he said. But when the tide turns, break them like an earthen jar on a stone. The wise old sage then offered some practical advice. A king must imitate the cuckoo, the boar, and the mountains of Meru. All symbols of strength and resilience. He should frequently visit the homes of his enemies, feigning concern for their well-being, but always keeping a watchful eye on their weaknesses. Bhishma concluded by emphasizing that a king's ultimate goal was to emerge victorious from every conflict without losing sight of his own humanity. A tree with beautiful blossoms may be weak in its roots, he said, but one must not allow oneself to be swayed by appearances. In the end, Bhishma's words were like a balm to King Yudhishthira's troubled soul, offering guidance and wisdom for navigating the treacherous waters of leadership. The world was on the brink of collapse. Yudhishthira, the mighty armed one, stood before Bhishma, his wise grandsire, and asked a question that weighed heavily on his mind. When righteousness suffers decay and unrighteousness reigns supreme, he said, how should a Brahmana live? How should a king rule in such a time of great distress? Bhishma, the scorcher of foes, looked at Yudhishthira with wise eyes and began to speak. The peace and prosperity of subjects, the sufficiency and seasonableness of rain, disease, death, and other fears are all dependent on the king's conduct, he said. When such a time of misery sets in, the righteous should support life by the aid of judgment. Bhishma then told an old story about Viswamitra, a great rishi who lived during a time of great drought. The gods had ordained that the earth would suffer for 12 years, and so it was the rivers shrunk into narrow streamlets, lakes and wells disappeared, and the Brahmanas abstained from sacrifices and recitation of the Vedas. As Bhishma spoke, Yudhishthira's mind wandered to a time when he had heard about Viswamitra's great trial. The rishi, who was known for his great intelligence, had been forced to wander homeless and afflicted with hunger. He left his wife and son in a place of shelter and roamed the earth fireless and homeless. One day Viswamitra came upon a hamlet inhabited by cruel hunters. The hamlet was filled with broken jars and pots made of earth. Dog skins were spread here and there, and bones and skulls lay in heaps. The rishi's stomach growled with hunger as he searched for food, but failed to find anything. As the sun began to set, Viswamitra fell down from weakness in that desolate hamlet. He reflected on his situation and thought about what was best for him to do now. He saw a large piece of flesh, a dog's meat, spread on the floor of a chandala's hut. The rishi arrived at the conclusion that he should steal the meat. But is it right for me to steal? Viswamitra asked himself. Can I, who am a Brahmana, take something that does not belong to me. Is this act of theft allowable in a season of distress? He thought about stealing from a low person first, then an equal, and finally, even an eminent and righteous man with his life ebbing away viswameter, decided that he would steal the meat. I do not see demerit in such theft, he said to himself. I shall rob. This haunch of dog's meat having formed this resolution, the great sage laid himself down for sleep in that place.
The sun was setting over the kingdom of Hest in Atura, casting a warm orange glow over the bustling streets. Yudhishthira, the eldest of the Pandava brothers, sat on his throne deep in thought. He had been struggling with the concept of duty and morality, and he sought guidance from his revered grandfather, Bhishma. Grandfather, Yudhishthira, said his voice, filled with concern, if what you are saying is true, then I am at a loss. What act can I perform that will not lead to harm or suffering? Why should robbers and outlaws be respected, while those who uphold morality are scorned? Bhishma listened attentively to Yudhishthira's words, his eyes twinkling with wisdom. He began to speak in a calm, measured tone. My child, I do not instruct you based solely on the Vedas or Scripture. My words come from experience and understanding. A king must gather wisdom from various sources, for one-sided morality will never lead to true victory. Bhishma's words dripped with sincerity as he continued. A king should provide for the observance of morality by his own understanding, guided by knowledge derived from diverse sources. The duties of a king can never be discharged by rules drawn from a single-minded morality. A weak-minded king will never display wisdom in the discharge of his duties. Yudhishthira listened intently to Bhishma's words, his mind racing with questions and doubts. He asked, is there any rule that should under no circumstances be violated? Bhishma's expression turned grave, and he replied, one should always worship Brahmanas who are venerable, where their learning devoted to penances, and rich in conduct conformable to the injunctions of the Vedas. This is a high and sacred duty, my child. Let your conduct towards the Brahmanas be always that which you observe towards the gods. Yudhishthira's eyes widened as he listened to Bhishma's words. He knew that his grandfather was speaking from experience, having spent many years in battle and rule. Bhishma's words were laced with a deep understanding of the complexities of morality and duty. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Yudhishthira felt a sense of clarity wash over him. He realized that true wisdom came not from following rules or scripture blindly, but from understanding the nuances of right and wrong. He knew that he had much to learn from his grandfather's words, and he was grateful for the guidance. Bhishma's eyes sparkled with warmth as he gazed at Yudhishthira. My child, he said, you are created for the accomplishment of fierce deeds. Behold me, how I have dispatched innumerable kshatriyas to heaven by following my duties.
In the midst of a summer conversation, Yudhishthira, the wise and just king, turned to Bhishma, his revered grandsire, seeking guidance on the merits of protecting those in need. Tell me, O grandsire, he asked, what is the reward for one who shelters a supplicant? Bhishma's eyes sparkled with wisdom as he replied, a great king, it is a virtue of the highest order to cherish those who seek protection. The ancient kings, Sivaji and others, achieved great bliss in heaven by extending their kindness to suppliants. I recall a tale from old, where a pigeon with utmost respect took in the foe as his guest, even sharing his own flesh to sustain him. Yudhishthira's curiosity was piqued, and he asked Bhishma to elaborate on the story of the pigeon. How did this remarkable bird feed his enemy with his own flesh? He inquired. Bhishma smiled, knowing that the tale would reveal a deeper truth. Listen well, O king, he said, for I shall recount the story as it was told by Rama, son of Freya, to King Muchkanda. This very question had been posed to Rama with humility and respect. As Bhishma began to narrate the tale, his words wove a vivid tapestry of events that took place in a distant era. A wicked fowler, driven by greed and devoid of compassion, roamed the forest, snatching birds from their nests to sell as meat. His existence was one of cruelty, with no friends or kin to speak of, for he had been rejected by all due to his brutal ways. Years passed, and the fowler's life continued unchanged until a great storm swept through the forest, threatening to uproot trees and drown creatures alike. The fowler, overwhelmed by fear, stumbled through the deluge, searching for shelter from the torrential rain. His senses dulled. He failed to find refuge on high ground, as all paths were submerged. As night began to fall, the fowler spotted a she-pigeon lying motionless on the ground, stiffened by cold without hesitation. He picked her up and imprisoned her in a cage, adding another victim to his list of suffering creatures. The wretched man's actions were guided solely by habit rather than any consideration for others. As the storm subsided, the sky cleared, revealing a celestial showcase of stars twinkling like diamonds on a velvet expanse. The Fowler, still shivering with cold and fear, gazed upon this breathtaking sight and began to move towards the sheltering tree, its branches swaying gently in the breeze under the tree's majestic canopy. The Fowler collapsed onto a bed of leaves, his head resting on a stone, exhausted by his ordeal, though consumed by affliction. In the heart of a magnificent tree, a pigeon's nest was home to a devoted family. The patriarch of this feathered household with his beautiful plumage had lived alongside his loving wife for many years, but on this particular morning she had ventured out in search of food and failed to return by nightfall. As the darkness gathered, the anxious bird began to lament her absence. So great has been the storm, and painful the shore that came today. He cried out, his voice trembling with worry, Alas, thou hast not yet returned, O dear wife, woe is on me. What can be the cause that she has not yet come back to us? He paced around their empty nest, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of her returness. The hours ticked by, the bird's despair deepened. Is everything right with that dear spouse of mine in the forest? He asked himself, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios without his wife. The nest felt desolate and empty, like a palace without its queen, even with sons and grandsons, daughters-in-law, and servants. A householder's home was incomplete without its beloved partner. The bird's thoughts were filled with memories of their life together. His wife had always been devoted to him, never eating before he did, nor bathing until he had finished his ablutions. She would never sit or lie down before him, but instead waited patiently for his cue. When he was away, she became cheerless, and when he was angry, she spoke sweetly to calm him. Doubtless the night wore on. The bird's longing for his wife grew unbearable. He knew that even if they lived in a grand palace without her by his side, it would be nothing but a desolate wilderness. His wife was more than just a companion. She was his trusted wholly in all aspects of life. Virtue, profit, and pleasure, she was the richest possession he could have, the best medicine for sickness and woe, and the only true friend he needed. A bird's lamentations echoed through the tree, a poignant reminder of the deep bond between a husband and wife. Without his partner, even the most magnificent home was reduced to nothingness. And so, as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the bird continued to wait for his beloved wife's return, his heart filled with hope and longing. As Bhishma, the wise sage, listened to this tale, he nodded in understanding. A house without a wife is indeed like a wilderness, he said, his eyes twinkling with wisdom. But a wife who is chaste and of agreeable speech, she is the greatest treasure one can possess.
In a lush forest amidst the vibrant hues of dawn, Bhishma sat in contemplative silences. Thoughts wandered to a poignant saying unfolding nearby. A sheep-pigeon, seized by a cunning Fowler, was perched on the tree branch. Her made sorrowful cries echoing through the air as the sheep-pigeon gazed at her lord from behind the bars of the cage. She began to reflect on their marriage bond. She pondered the ancient wisdom that in the eyes of the deities, a husband is his wife's highest deity. If he is pleased with her, all blessings follow. But if not, even the gods turn away. The sheep-pigeon's thoughts were like autumn leaves rustling in the wind. They carry a message of sorrow and resignation. Her mind racing, the sheep-pigeon realized that their situation was dire. She had been captured by the Fowler, and her mate was left to grieve. In this moment of woe, she made a decision to put aside her own suffering and consider her lord's well-being. With a heavy heart, she turned to him and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Me dear lord," she said, "I shall do what is beneficial for you. Now I see the Fowler lying nearby, shivering with cold and hunger as your supplicant. I implore you to show him kindness and hospitality. Remember that one who lets a suppliant perish from want of help incurs a sin equal to slaying a Brahmana or harming a cow." Both revered beings in our world, the sheep-pigeon's words were laced with the weight of their circumstances. She knew that her mate, possessed of knowledge and wisdom, should follow the natural order of their existence as pigeons by showing compassion to the Fowler. They would not only earn his gratitude, but also reap the rewards of virtue in this life and the next. Their eyes locked onto her, lords filled with a deep sorrow, yet also a sense of determination. Cast aside your grief for me, she urged him. You have sons, you have progeny. Think of their well-being and our future. Generations offer worship to this Fowler, that his heart may be pleased. Do not indulge in any grief on my account. I am but a small creature in the grand tapestry of life. The she-pigeon spoke. These words her maid's sorrow seemed to fade, replaced by a glimmer of understanding and compassion. He looked upon the Fowler with newfound eyes, seeing an opportunity to balance their karma and secure their family's future in this moment of selflessness. The she-pigeon's sacrifice became a beacon of hope in the midst of adversity.
In a forest far away, Bhishma, a wise and venerable sage, stood amidst the trees, his eyes closed in contemplation. Nearby a pigeon perched on a branch, listening intently as Bhishma recounted a tale of morality and reason spoken by his wife. The pigeon's heart swelled with delight, and tears of joy welled up in its eyes as Bhishma finished speaking. The pigeon turned to behold the Fowler, who had been watching them from afar. The bird approached the hunter with reverence, honoring him according to the ancient rites. "Thou art welcome today," the pigeon said, his voice filled with affection. "Tell me, what shall I do? For thee this is the home. Thou shouldst not repine. Hospitality demands that we show kindness, even to our foes, when they seek shelter within our walls." The Fowler, stiff with cold, replied, "I am chilled to the bone. Let provision be made for warming me." The pigeon, moved by compassion, flew off to gather dry leaves, and soon returned with a small flame. He set the leaves ablaze, and as the fire crackled to life, he invited the Fowler to warm his limbs. As the hunter thawed out before the warmth of the flames, his hunger pangs grew more insistent. "I am famished," he confessed to the pigeon. The bird's face fell, for it had no stores to offer its guest. With a hint of shame, he explained that they, as denizens of the woods, lived from day to day, never hoarding for the morrow. The pigeon's mind whirled with thoughts of how to appease his guest's hunger. He reflected silently, deprecating their way of life, which seemed so meager and inadequate. But then a spark of inspiration struck him. "I shall gratify thee," he declared, addressing the Fowler. "Wait." For a moment, with newfound resolve, the pigeon ignited another fire. His heart filled with joy at the prospect of honoring his guest, he circled the flames 3 times, his feathers glistening in the light, and then stepped into their warmth. The Fowler watched in awe as the bird surrendered to the fire's gentle heat. The hunter's eyes widened as he beheld the pigeon selfless. "What have I done?" he asked himself, horror creeping over him like a dark shadow. He realized that his cruelty had brought him to this pass, and tears of remorse welled up in his eyes. As the bird vanished into the flames, the Fowler began to lament his own actions, his voice echoing through the forest in a sorrowful refrain.
In a dense forest of Fowler, Bhishma by name had set up his hunting grounds. His sharp eyes scanned the surroundings, ever vigilant for the perfect prey. Suddenly his gaze fell upon the pigeon, its feathers glistening in the sunlight as it fluttered about, seemingly unaware of the danger lurking nearby. Bhishma's instincts took over, and with swift precision he launched his net into the air, ensnaring the unsuspecting bird. The pigeon struggled to free itself, but Bhishma's grip was firm as he held the struggling creature in his grasp. A spark of compassion flickered within him. He gazed deeper into the pigeon's eyes and saw something there that gave him pause. A Fowler's gaze lingered on the pigeon as it lay helpless at his feet, its gentle coos filling the air. A pang of remorse pierced Bhishma's heart, and he felt a wave of self-loathing wash over him. "Alas, cruel and senseless that I am," he muttered to himself. "What have I done? I am certainly a mean wretch." The words tumbled out in a torrent as he began to berate himself for his actions. Bhishma's thoughts turned inward, and he became lost in a sea of self-reproach. "I am unworthy of credit," he lamented. "My understanding is wicked. I am ever sinful in my resolves." The Fowler's words grew more fervid as he condemned himself for his profession, abandoning all kinds of honorable occupation. "I have become a Fowler. A cruel wretch that I am." He flung his arms wide as if embracing the weight of his guilt. In a moment of clarity, Bhishma saw the pigeon's sacrifice in a new light. The bird had given its life to teach him a valuable lesson, the importance of duty and compassion towards all creatures. A sense of resolve took hold within the father, and he vowed to change his ways from this day. He declared, denying every comfort to my body, I shall wear it out even as a shallow tank in the summer season. Ishmael's words became a promise to himself, a vow to renounce his former life of violence and greed. He would henceforth practice righteousness, just like the selfless pagan that had given its life for him. The father's heart swelled with determination as he cast aside